Meg, do you want us to? Oh, okay. Shut up.
Hello, my name is Megan Rowe, and this is the Authentic Artistry and Commercial Success panel with Jazz North. I'm going to just ask everyone in the discussion to introduce themselves, starting with Daniel.
Hi everyone, my name is Daniel Garel. I've been working at Edition Records for about a year and a half now, just working as a project manager, so working on the catalogue and lots of stuff behind the scenes, as well as helping out with some marketing as well.
Emma?
Hi, I'm Emma Johnson. I'm a saxophonist and composer based in Leeds. I'm the band leader of Emma Johnson's Gravy Boat, which is a melodic contemporary quintet.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Mead, and I'm the Artistic Director of the Manchester Jazz Festival and also the Director of Talent Development at Jazz North. And I'm also Vice Chair of the Jazz Promotion Network as well.
Hey, I'm Adam Moses. I'm from Jazz Refreshed. We've been running for 17 years, and our aim was to kind of bring some diversity to jazz and kind of look at jazz in a different way. I'm one of the directors.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Steve, what were you going to say? Sorry, I caught you off there.
You look fabulous today, Meg.
Thank you so much. Blushing. Okay. If anyone is wondering who I am, my name is Meg. I am in a band called J Frisco, and I'm also working with Jazz North on the Jazz North online broadcast, and I am the host for today's discussion. So first off, to kick off the conversation, I wanted to ask Emma, what are the best ways to learn about your audience as an artist or band?
I think quite often, obviously, it's trial and error. But for me, I've found that the best way is actually to ask them. I suppose maybe it seems quite obvious, but some of the kind of most interesting conversations and the most useful things that I've found out from my audience are by just asking them, whether it's a simple thing like people on my mailing list, what about it do you enjoy? What do you want to hear more about? Are people on gigs? Let me know what you want to see on the merch stand, or what you think of our new song. I think just opening up conversations in that way is a really good way to kind of bring people in and engage people where they might not otherwise be.
Excellent. And as someone that works in a record setting for Edition Records, Daniel, how is that different for you, trying to learn about your audience or audiences?
Well, I guess it kind of works in multiple ways, and I mean it also depends obviously what kind of a record label you're working with. But I mean for us at Edition, it often feels like that obviously artists often come with their own audiences, but then a record label has this ability to kind of like foster some kind of community, some kind of like group of people that will enjoy the artist roster that's there. So there's this kind of like two-dimensional thing of having artists with their audiences, the label with its own audience, which is kind of more willing maybe to discover what else is on the roster. So I think you kind of have to approach it from those both angles. It's about, for us, it often feels like we're trying to connect with the artist's existing fan base, but also how we can kind of like, it's often asking ourselves that question of how we can encourage those fans of a particular artist to go check out the other artists on a roster as well. So I think the biggest thing for us is, to answer that question of like how we learn more about our audience, it's kind of finding out what that mixing pot is of artist audiences, labels audiences, and trying to ask those questions that will help us to cross-pollinate and to try and kind of like get that interaction that often you'll get from audiences discovering music. When we've got, for example, in the past, we've often worked with a lot of artists from Scandinavia. And, what are the barriers, or what are the what are the barriers, what are the kind of talking points that are going to get them interested in artists in the UK, and vice versa, what's going to get US artists and audiences interested in music that's going on here in the UK and what's going on in the rest of Europe as well. So I think it's a case of like trying to work out what that midpoint is, trying to you know tackle those barriers is a big thing for us. But I think what Emma mentioned about just you know, asking your audiences, you know, why they're into this music, why they're and you know how they got there as well. I think it's really important for us. It's understanding, you know, understanding those basics of just asking them first. I think is a really important point.
Yeah, I think it can sometimes feel a bit silly to just ask, like even after you've just finished a gig. Oh, you liked it. Well, what did you like about it? It can feel a bit odd, but actually it's really important. And I suppose as well, the saying goes for you at festivals, Steve, to ask your audiences what they think.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. I think the audiences are the most fascinating part of jazz, really. If I'm speaking as someone who runs a festival, I think I spend more time watching the audience than I do the band. Actually, I like to actually see how the audience are reacting, and I kind of try and connect how they're reacting to something specific, because for me, it's about the experience. Being at a gig is an experience. And being on stage, if you're a performer, is an experience. But trying to create a memorable experience for everyone who's come out is absolutely key. And actually standing amongst the audience and watching and see how they kind of respond, whether it's physically, visually, emotionally, to whatever's going on stage. That really helps me understand what audiences can respond to and how I can best shape the program and draw more people to it. I think if I was speaking on behalf of an artist, I'd be thinking, well, what exactly do you want to know about the audience? You know, do you want to know their gig-going habits? You know, do you want to know about their taste? You know, have they got any friends that could become your audiences as well? So I'd be thinking about asking. I mean, the Emma's suggestion about talking was really good, but actually asking some really pertinent questions of them that would then enable you to find out more about their habits that could then allow you to build your audiences on that. That's a bit convoluted answer.
And as a programmer of a festival, is it important to you that artists and bands know about their audience?
In advance of doing, do you mean is it important they know who the hell's coming to that gig, or about who the audience is for their music generally?
Yeah, that they have an awareness of their audience, and that they, you know, that they get it. Really,
it's really important because any gig is a partnership. It's a partnership between the artist, the audience, and the promoters putting it on. It's a three-way partnership, and those 3 points intersect with each other. And the better we understand who is into this band, and the better the band understands who is into their own music, the more people we can reach and connect with the experience of going to see them. And it's as simple as that, really, trying to. And you can't, but audiences are really difficult to not just identify and find, but to actually, you can't categorize, especially jazz audiences. It's just full of so many weird and wonderful people. They're all so different. You can't kind of typecast any of them. You just have to try and, like I say, it's working out what they respond to, and then trying to figure out in everything else you do how that can connect with them in ways that you've seen before.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm just going to say hello to John Pope, who said hello in the chat, and Andrew Edwards says howdy. Pierre Yates says, good to see that most accomplished jazz musician Emma live in the panel discussion. Love it. And hello, Heather Spencer as well. How are you doing? Please, if you are tuning in, send us a question, and we'd love to answer them today. So the next question that I had was, how does the mixed interpretation of the word jazz affect labels, festivals, and artists? Adam?
I mean, it's kind of an interesting, from our perspective as Jazz Refreshed, we came into the genre, and in some ways that was kind of the limitation for us looking at what we were coming into. It was the limitation of it, because everyone wants to give their own definition of what jazz is, and that's always been the case, whoever those people are. And we came from it from such a completely different angle that we kind of had to just kind of do away with the kind of classification of what jazz is, and we just kind of put on what we felt was jazz. And I think everyone sort of does that in their own way. Over the years, we've had so many people who used to come to our events and go, "This is amazing. You shouldn't even put jazz in the title, because that's limiting the amount of people that you're going to impact, like, or people who will kind of pay attention to what you're saying." And you hear that, but for us, really wanting to create some sort of change in jazz, how do you change it without saying jazz? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you, we could have called ourselves anything Refresh, but we're Jazz Refresh. So I think it says it all in the name. I think sometimes, the only limitation to it is the, who you're trying to present what you're doing to. And we've always just presented what we think is like the best, whatever, dope, jazz, whatever you want to call it. We put it all in that box and just say, look, this is what we do. If you like it, like it. If you don't, you don't, kind of thing. So yeah, that's my interpretation.
Awesome. Thank you. Emma, have you ever had any sort of, negative feelings towards using the word jazz when promoting your music?
I don't think so. I think, like Adam says, it's kind of just about saying this is what it is, and almost part of the challenge of that is marketing it or presenting it in a way that the people that you hope will like it kind of come across it or find it. I think one of the fairly interesting things is the kind of really wide-ranging, like, kind of scope of venues and promoters that you can go from like one jazz gig to another and find such a kind of varying audience. And I guess that is down to the interpretation of it. People, like turn up to a gig and people kind of expecting that you're going to be playing something different to maybe what you are, because that's what they jazz as, if that makes sense. But it's always, I don't know, in terms of gravy, but anyway, it's kind of just that what I write is jazz, I think. And, hopefully, that kind of comes across and people seem to enjoy it.
Excellent. Daniel, could I ask you the same question? How does the mixed interpretation of the word jazz affect how you promote music from your label?
I think, what Adam was saying about that kind of, there is definitely a feeling of when people think of the word jazz, they automatically, like any kind of genre classification, it kind of provides like a box for you to kind of stick stuff in. And obviously, I mean, whenever you're trying to promote any kind of music that, defies those kind of easy categorizations, whether it's like, at the level of just jazz, or you want to talk about it more specifically, and what kind of jazz you're putting out. I think that has been a challenge for the record industry and jazz labels, for a very long time. But I think for us, it's also presented an opportunity because oftentimes, I've been working at Edition for the past year and a half or so, but it's been a label that's been going since, around the kind of mid noughties. And Dave Stapleton, who set up the label back then, I mean, it was just all about putting out, music that was really interesting, fresh, that was kind of trying to not, look at it itself in those terms of, writing traditional jazz records. And those are the people that he signed, first off. And I guess it's always been a case of trying to continue that sentiment throughout the signings that have gone on kind of since then. And so I think what sometimes that mixed interpretation that you talk about kind of provides a lot of opportunity, because there's this kind of sense of, there's this opportunity where you can kind of define it for yourself in a way, and you can kind of you can sign artists and you can work with artists that are always looking to challenge that in a sense, and it provides a new context. It's that kind of thing of saying that if you call it something, if you call it jazz, then whenever there's some kind of subversion about the music that you're putting out, if whether artists are kind of like messing with those tropes that people associate with it, that's when something becomes quite exciting. And I think that's what I think Editions tried to do, trying to look for those artists who are doing that with the music in a way. So yeah, it does. I mean, when you look at if you try and put on a type of metric to it, then yeah, it presents limitations. But I think creatively, often that can be an exciting thing to kind of play off of when you're marketing it in particular.
Excellent. Okay, so this is open to anyone to answer. What is the most surprising thing you've learned about jazz audiences?
I'm remembering a gig actually that we had during the Jazz Festival quite a long time ago. It was in the early days. And actually, it's funny what you're saying, Adam. We had the same discussion with ourselves about whether to call ourselves a jazz festival right at the beginning. I'm glad we have done. And I'm thinking about, what you guys have done to totally reinvent and re-own the word and just go out there and do something really bold and confident. And I think that's fantastic. And so, Jazz Refresh has been responsible for the single most re-energizing of the scene. But just going back to the question, I remember standing at the back. Again, I was trying to watch my audience at this gig, which was it was a bit kind of tangential. I knew it was going to be demanding for some members of the audience. It was a free gig, so there were all types of people there. And I was standing in between an elderly gentleman and a teenager. So I was in between these two people. And they both saw me, and they both thought, right, here's this guy who's programmed this. I'm going to go over and tell him what I think. And the old chap came over and said, oh, there's not much jazz in the Manchester Jazz Festival, is there? And the teenager overheard him and said, no, it's great, isn't it? And that kind of encapsulated for me the challenge that we have, that when we present this music, we're catering for such a wide variety of listenership and taste. It's the most fluid art form, which gives it its beauty, but it also gives us the challenge of how to promote it. Who are we promoting it to? Because it means something different to every single human being, and it can do, and that's why it's so great. There's no answer to the question, but I think knowing that it's indefinable can help you communicate its qualities.
I think for Jazz Refreshed, we came at it from such a different angle, in that for us it wasn't necessarily about the audience, because or what the audience felt about jazz or what they thought about jazz, because we had to change that anyway. So our thing was putting together a program that we loved, that we thought was like, this is like the best example of whatever it may be, and kind of put creatively in some ways through curation, putting our stamp onto like what we want to present as this is the thing. So our thing was, this is about jazz. So if you want to call jazz, you got to have straight ahead, you got to have acid jazz, fusion, Afrobeat, whatever it may be that fits into that jazz kind of bracket for us personally. And then you curate something around that, which when you have it like that, it's almost like the audience are kind of, you're trying to create this little thing, kind of show this is how great it is. Come every week. We've done a weekly session until this year for 17 years, weekly live event. So it's like, come, you'll hear something, you might not like it, but you keep coming, you'll hear something you do like. So the impetus is more about, for me, the curation of the music as a vehicle to kind of grow the audience or get them to see like the other sides of it. So it is quite it's quite a challenge, but we came into quite a challenging audience when we first came into jazz. Obviously we didn't fit the kind of especially this is like, you know, 2000, early 2000s when we started, we didn't fit the usual kind of audience members of jazz events. So we used to go to jazz events and be like, you know, between myself, Justin, Bunny, we're like the three black guys in the audience. So we kind of came at it from a different angle. So when we went out flyering, because that's what you had to do back then, because there was no social media as such, you just have to go outside clubs and fly it. And we felt as though people expected, like, you know, it's, you see these guys outside with baseball caps and jackets on, and they're handing out a flyer outside of a jazz event. And most people dismissed it because of the kind of perception of what I was giving them a flyer for. So we had to like vocally like, yo, jazz, this is jazz, it's jazz. And then we got to a point of saying, actually, this jazz audience exists. They go to these places. That happens already. Like, how do you get those people who are not into jazz? How do you kind of start to encourage those? We have to go there. You can't sit here and have a jazz club and expect the audience to, like, new audience to necessarily find themselves. You kind of have to go out to meet them. So that's why we put Jazz Refreshed in a bar on Portobello Road. You know what I mean? And then we went out and started to promote to young people our age, you know what I mean, diverse audiences, to try and get them in. And I think probably, you know, not for us because we knew, but I think one of the surprising things is like a jazz audience is just any audience. Like having run the weekly sessions for so long at Mau Mau Bar, there were a lot of regulars who used to go there, just people off the street who, I mean, I'm telling you, after a couple months, they had an opinion on jazz. These people had never listened to jazz before, but, you know, they're regulars in there. Then they had an opinion. And that for me is like a massive thing when you got someone that doesn't engage in jazz at all. And then due to having to be in or continue to go to a particular space, they start to kind of learn a little bit more. And then, you know, a lot of these guys have been going for years, suddenly become like experts on free jazz. You know what I mean? Like they're talking to me about, hey, I don't really like this guy. So yeah, I think a jazz audience is any audience, really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's great. Eddie Adams says, evening. Evening, Eddie.
Hi, Eddie.
Hope you're well. Who else have we got that said hello? Alexander. Hello, Alexander. He says hello to the panel.
Alexander.
And I think that's it. Excellent. Okay. Next up. So in the planning meeting for this panel, we were talking about the idea of selling out, and whether it was you were more likely to be told you were selling out as a jazz artist or band than someone from another genre. Has anyone got any thoughts on that, or have any stories surrounding that?
I mean, no, I've never been told that. I think the kind of connotation of selling out is like, in terms of music, is kind of doing something maybe almost the opposite of jazz in some, or it can be seen as that. In that, like, I don't think you would necessarily sell to start kind of touring a jazz group. So I'm not sure if maybe like if you like moving away from jazz would be could get kind of tarred with that. But in general, I think it's a nonsense thing. I think a lot of people kind of bandy it around, you know, if you like take kind of like a I don't know, like a gig that people see as like less artistically.
I don't know. It's funny because it's something you're accused of rather than something you voluntarily do, isn't it? It's a kind of it's like a passive action. But I don't think it's bespoke to jazz. I think there's a lot of other kind of, you know, if you want to split music up into genres, there's plenty of genres that have encountered that kind of attitude when they get to a certain level of success. It's quite often associated with a level of financial or profile success, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then you start responding to that rather than your original artistic ambitions, and that then your fan base makes a call at that point and says, well, actually, you've deviated too far from what I think you should be doing, and I'm going. See ya, you know. But also, who's calling the shot? Who's according to who? Selling out according to who? It's like
I think a lot of the time selling out is just a matter of miscommunication between artists and their fans. Like, I think if you're an artist, then you've got a particular, because everyone has a particular level in which they will go or they won't go. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've at Jazz Fresh, we've had this thing at the beginning. We don't take alcohol or cigarette companies or gambling site money, because we were just like, we don't drink. It's not something we want to associate with our image, our brand, so we're not going to do it. Someone else, that's perfectly fine. I don't look at them and kind of go, oh, right, you're taking alcohol money. It's a non-existent thing. So I think a lot of the time it's artists kind of portraying a particular direction without actually communicating what their views and how they feel about their movement forwards, where they want to get to and what it takes to get to that place. And I guess the level of success, people, they may change what they want to do, and I think communication in that is key as well. Not that it matters what anyone calls you, like whether you're a sellout or not. Do you know what I mean? Like, no one's paying your bills other than the gig you're taking or the thing you're doing, and I think as well, those hardcore fans may feel, I think sometimes if you've bought into an artist and their journey, you kind of, I think fans feel a kind of connection to them. And when that journey doesn't go in the direction that they think it's going to go, or they feel like they've been let down, that's when that kind of stuff comes out. But ultimately, I feel like, if it's the choice you want to make as a creative choice or an artistic choice or even a financial choice, maybe you're broke and you feel like this is your way, you just got to stand firm by your decision of what you want to do. And I think that's final. Do you mean you just got to do what you got to do?
Thanks for putting that so much more eloquently there. I'll dive in on that.
It's not what I do.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Daniel.
No, I was just going to just really brief, just to build on what Adam was saying. I think also it's kind of that turning point between artists, like what artists are willing to kind of compromise on versus versus what the communication is out, to artists, to audiences. Because I think, obviously, for a quote unquote jazz label, I mean, if one identified themselves as that, a certain artist doing a standards album, really creatively, might seem like selling out to one group of audiences, and might seem like selling out to an artist. But obviously, if it's the right kind of collaboration with another artist that person's wanted to work with for ages, then why shouldn't that be something to be explored? Even if, like, some audiences might look at that and go, oh man, that's selling out. I think that often, as Adam says, it's that miscommunication. But ultimately, I think labels and artists have a kind of that joint role of like making sure that audiences are communicated to about what those decisions are, because ultimately, like, those projects are interesting anyway, most of the time, you know what I mean? And ultimately, even if you were to think of an artist selling out, there's always going to be a market, there's always going to be an audience group for that, for whatever that product is. I think you just got to kind of temper those, you've got to kind of balance it as you go through.
Yeah, I guess that's back to that, like, learning about your audience thing as well. Like, if you're in communication with your audience or the people that you're selling to, and it's so easy to kind of get information about demographics and that with all social media as it is now, that you can kind of gauge a reaction to, like, a direction that you're going in, and if that feels like the right thing for you as a band, and it might not be the right thing for some audiences, then I suppose that's a decision rather than selling out in any way.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Do you feel as though Do you feel as though there are certain audiences that dislike being sold to compared to other audiences?
I think it depends on the method of being sold to. I think everyone kind of expects to be sold to somehow, but I think there are, culturally there are differences between how people sell things. Like different countries have different ways. If you take an American artist compared to a British artist, and how an American artist will promote and sell their album to the audience in front of them in a gig, it's vastly different to a UK band who like almost kind of like, oh yeah, I've got my album on sale, it's over here. And I've worked with American artists that have like written songs about buying the album at the back of the room. Do you know what I mean? They perform that live on stage. You know what I mean? So I think I think it's how it's done. I think it's this is kind of knowing your audience in some ways, and that engagement with your audience has to be meaningful. For if you're trying to sell, everyone's trying to sell something. This is the society we live in kind of thing. But if it's a meaningful engagement with your audience, that you kind of understand your audience, you kind of know how to present what you're doing, I think that's not the problem. I think sometimes it's when sometimes that message is, or the kind of the action of the selling is kind of becomes slightly more than your audiences expect to get from you kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like a hard sell might be a bit too much for your audience.
Yeah.
Whereas, another artist may have that interaction with their audience. I know a lot of the hip hop guys back in the day used to have that engagement. Like, you go down Oxford Street and you sell your thing and you engage hard with whoever you're trying to sell. You hard sell it. That was what we used to do when we first started the record label, and we do an album launch at Jazz Refreshed. Do you know what I mean? There's like probably 50, 60 people in there. And my thing is, we're selling £5 CDs. Like everyone's coming out with a CD. They used to have to walk past a wall of people going, yeah, you bought a CD, you bought a CD, you bought a CD. Hard selling it. But, people expect that from us. It's a kind of like different way. So I guess that's the kind of how it's done is kind of more important, I guess.
I think it also has something to do with, you touched upon it actually, Adam, the extent to which an audience has had its expectations met or exceeded or not met, and I think, being sold, having that feeling of being sold to that slightly unpleasant, like you've been used or you've been flogged something you didn't ask for or didn't want, it's that kind of, that's what you don't really want an audience member to feel. But if they feel it anyway, they're probably unlikely to feel that if they've had an experience that was better than they were expecting, regardless of what it was and how you promoted it anyway. So actually, you can't control their expectations, but you can control, how well their experience is kind of delivered in an environment. But yeah, it's a funny question. Good question. Funny one.
I think as well, thinking about... sorry, Megan.
Carry on, Emma.
Sure. I was just going to say, I think as well, thinking about having the right thing for your audience members. Yeah. So it's something that we've been kind of thinking about quite a lot with the vast amount of time and space in lockdown. But obviously with the jazz audience being so kind of diverse, a lot of kind of gig attenders still want to buy a CD, but then you've got this flip side of the coin with an audience who probably don't have a CD player and are interested like exclusively in other things. They're going to stream your music online, so they want to buy, something else, a print or a T-shirt or X or Y or Z. And thinking about if you're trying to sell something to your audience, it's got to be something that they're interested in, something that they want. And I think, just kind of having that in mind is pretty important.
Yeah. It was something that was brought up in the planning for this panel, was the idea of selling out. And I thought, do people still sort of think that about this selling out thing and, you know, accuse people of doing it. But I think it's more of a concern as an emerging artist, as someone who is trying to get themselves out there. It can be quite a worrying thing of, oh, if the sort of
Frozen?
Daniel, were you going to say something before that?
Yeah, well, maybe while we wait for Megan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to, I mean, kind of.
oh, am I back?
She's back.
Oh, yeah.
You froze mid incredible statement, Megan. It was sounding perfect.
Where did I get up to?
As being an emerging artist.
Yeah. It's just that when you're sort of in that place where you're trying to establish yourself and get yourself out there, it can be a bit of a worry that you are asking too much, that you know, am I selling out by asking people to support me in my weird music? I think that's as an emerging artist, it can feel a bit scary, I suppose.
I mean, I think fundamentally, I believe what your creative vision has to come first. So whatever that is, and I say this to bands all the time. Obviously, I run live events, I run festivals, I do international work, and I only book bands that I love. That's my format. I book bands that I love. I don't care how much followers you got. I don't care about any of that. It's like, how good is this music? How good is your art form? I always tell everyone, I don't like everything. No one likes everything. There's love stuff. I can hear the quality and I think, that's great. Recorded really well. It just doesn't do anything for me. And I think when you go back to your craft, you're always going to come up to people like me who are going to be like, yeah, it doesn't work for me. Or it does work for me. But I'm just one person. So ultimately, you're going to go through life having to bounce around loads of different like booking agents, promoters, all these people. But ultimately, if the bottom line is that you love your craft and your art, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years, it may take 20 years for you to get to the point which you deem to be success. But that will be a journey well spent, as far as I'm concerned. Do you know what I mean? Like, as long as you've made it to that point and you've done what you have to do to get to that point, but without sacrificing your artistry, and you can look back and say, well, I've got this catalogue of albums that I'm super proud with. The first one sold 12 copies, but I'm here now, I'm selling 35,000 copies, whatever it may be. Then that for me that's a career, that's progress in your own art form. I think the worst possible thing with that selling out thing is probably selling out yourself, so that you yourself as an artist get to a point where you're like, I don't even like what I'm doing. I'm out here doing this stuff and it's not the stuff I want to do because I'm trying to please someone or try and get this gig, or, you know, I think audience and fans can a lot of the time read that in your music if you're not fully 100% behind your own stuff. Do you know what I mean? Or you're making stuff for a particular reason. And I think when you're true to yourself, that fan base that grows is true to you. Those are engaged fans. Those are people who are going to buy into your message and who you are as an artist. And ultimately, they'll support you even more, kind of thing.
I think
it's also about vision, isn't it? What's your vision as an artist?
Yeah.
What I'm doing, still meeting that vision. Yes, it is great. Let's go. If not, then either stop doing it or change the vision, or you know, kind of being aware of. It was just what you're saying, Adam. Really, being aware of what you set out to do. And how you.
And that may change. You know, that may change. You may kind of get a lot and totally be into something completely different, as long as that change is like a creative growth and not one out of just pure, you know. And this is nothing against that. Again, if it's out of pure desperation, it's out of pure desperation. Do you know what I mean? If you're like, I don't want to go to a 9 to 5, I want to do music and I'm going to have to do this to make my music career happen, I'm not one to judge you. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not for me to judge you. You judge yourself. Do you know what I mean? You have to make decisions based on your circumstance. But I think at some point you're going to have to look back at what you've done, and you need to be happy with what you've created and brought out into the world.
Yeah. One thing I would say, just added in, Megan, about where I think you can detect authenticity. Certainly, if you've been not as a musician, but as someone who works with musicians and is either selecting something or deciding on which artists are going to be doing things. And I think that's where that, if you want to call it authenticity, that's where it comes into play, and it is really audible, and it's something that now at this point in my life, I find quite easy to detect now, and it's just like a radar. And I don't know how conscious an artist might be when they start out to actually be authentic. If they're just doing it and they're not aware of it, then that's great. But it is very hard. It's very easy to kind of see when someone doesn't really mean what they say.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've got a few questions from our audience. Hello, audience. What do you like about this stream?
I was going to say they have a good time.
They're having a great time. Just want to know more about the audience. So I have a question from Louise Gibbs. Is the audience for jazz inevitably small scale?
I'll dive in on that if you want.
Go for it. Yes.
I would say not. I think especially with how things are, it feels, if anything, like the kind of playing field is leveling more and more all the time. Even if it's just with like kind of Spotify playlist or like the, pre-coronavirus, I suppose, the amount of different gigs and things going on. And even now, I suppose, the live streams that are kind of popping up, it feels like jazz is a much less, I can't remember what the word we were saying before, but it feels like it's a much less kind of scary word to audiences. It feels like a lot of different audiences are kind of come into it, and it's much easier to reach kind of all these different people just by kind of having some music online and having a chat, I think. So I would say no.
Yeah, I think also we've often found like this perception that people think that there's like there's a ceiling to what jazz musicians could think to produce or to achieve in terms of success. And I think you only have to pick out a couple of examples. I think all the work Adam's doing at Jazz Refreshed, being a good example in this country, of just examples where people really smash that and kind of like show that it's never the case. And I think actually having worked at Edition, I've kind of realized as well that, and been surprised in some ways at some of the successes that we've had with artists, especially because when I first joined, and a lot of the catalogue that we built up over time has really been cataloguing and reflecting musicians in Europe and the UK who are doing really interesting, but oftentimes we're seen as commercially not successful in some way, whether because it was really individual, or is it stuff that was came more out of like free improv and stuff like that, things that people would not traditionally see as commercially successful. But then having when you put the right team behind it that are kind of like really passionate about the music and just are alongside the artists in terms of their conviction of doing it, it just goes to show I've been really surprised at some of the successes that you can have working with this music and with these artists and with the artists that are just super passionate about it. Because I think far too many times people kind of look at it and think it's a write-off because it's got the word jazz to it, and I think there's just so many examples where that's just not the case.
I think it's all in the presentation. If you define what you do as my music is for 15 people in the back room of a pub, then it's going to be fine. But if you want to go out there and say my music will make you cry, it will make you jump, it will make you kiss people, subject to distancing measures in place at any time. You got to kind of like think about not the limitation, but actually potential, haven't you? And that's like taking away all the kind of what you think are the current parameters of your audience, and just actually changing how you're defining it, and kind of like, that's key to it, I think. Just shaking off the limitation that you feel is there.
There was a great article as well. I can't quite remember who wrote it, but I'll put a link on the stream about not actually needing kind of limitless people to be engaging with your work, but actually having a kind of smaller amount of really engaged, really interested fans who kind of, are up for coming to your gig whenever you're in town or buying your new release when it comes out. You don't need kind of to get everybody. I think it was maybe based on like 1,000 kind of fans who are, like really into it, and that can, I guess, well, to me it seems like a huge number to kind of aim for, but in the context of like all the music fans in the world, then if you can, kind of reach those people who for them your music is what they like, then that seems like quite an achievable goal, really.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got a comment from Helena Jane Summerfield. Steve, this one's for you.
Not Helena. She's a tricky customer, Helena.
the MJF tagline one year of "Find Your Own Jazz" was great.
Find your jazz. Find your jazz. Yes, I remember
Love it.
Go on.
Yeah. That's it. She's just saying that. No, she's just making the comment that was an excellent tagline.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I agree.
Well, that's the thing with these marketing people. They just kind of fly by night. They come up with a good idea and they never stick with it. Next year it's something else. But I think the idea was that it was all about your own personal experience. Well, it still is. I think for all of us, we just, that's what everyone wants, whether you're performing it or listening to it or talking about it. You want to find your own experience, your own journey with that music, and that sense of discovery is one of the joyous things about music. I think about finding something that's gone, boom, wow, yes, and feeling like that feeling belongs to you as well. Like that music was made just for you in that moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So a question for Daniel from Eddie Adams. He has said, I guess choosing to release on vinyl has a large upfront cost. Is it always risky to make that call to print vinyl for artists not as big?
What was the rest? Oh, it was like Kneebody or someone like that. Yeah, I guess. Adam will know a lot about this as well. Vinyl, yeah, it's a huge cost. It costs a lot. Yeah. It's a lot of time to produce. It has a huge environmental impact as well. There's so many things about it, but it's loved. It's still loved. It lives on, and yeah, for us anyway. I can't speak about labels in general, but at least at Edition. Yeah, it is a consideration. We wouldn't necessarily do vinyl for every release, but I don't think that's to do necessarily with how big an artist is, like how much following they have. I think it comes down to what the audiences want, how they want to interact with the music, how they want to consume it. Because for some artists, the types of venues that they're going to, that they're going to be taking this stuff to, it kind of makes sense for them to have at least a little bit of, like a small run of vinyl or something like that. It kind of makes sense for the vibe that they're going for. And also, there's so many, it's kind of hard to answer the question because there's so many considerations just above, what's financially risky. Because you can always mitigate that risk. You can always print less. You can, there's always ways around it. But sometimes you have to think about it in the round. It's about how that audience want to connect with the music. And it's also about maybe for the project, maybe vinyl makes sense. you know, maybe the artwork package that you're going to create out of it is going to really make sense to really round off and kind of and get that over the line in a sense. So yeah, I think it's a lot of different things, and it's not an easy call, because sometimes you make the wrong call and, you know, it's not the best. But yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
If I could just answer some of that as well. I think that doing vinyl, everyone, you know, thinks vinyl is really nice and lovely. You need to have people to buy that vinyl, unless you're strapped and you got that. I mean, unless you got that money and you can afford to have it. Because I come from an era of, you know, everything was on vinyl when we first started, like DJing and stuff like that. So record labels, you press something on vinyl, if it doesn't sell, then your £2,000 to £3,000 is stuck in boxes in your front room, kind of thing. So I think this goes back to the very first question in kind of knowing your audience, knowing what your audience wants. I always look at, like, you know, when we release an artist, not that it's a consideration because some things just need to be there, but there are often artists, especially the up and coming ones, if you don't have a fan base, I have to ask the question, who's buying it? Who's putting their money in their pocket if you don't have a fan base? That is first and foremost for me. Building fan base, building engagement with your audience, getting to know them, understand them, and then you can kind of make those questions aren't even a question. You just kind of go to them like, oh, I'm going to do vinyl for this. You know that at least you'll sell the first 198 for you to be able to break even, and then you're good. Do you know what I mean? But other than that, I'm always sort of like, you've got to understand the fan base, your own fan base, and, you know, your social media. I always go like on social media, for me, that's 10% of sales. The amount of people you have following you, that's never more than 10% of sales for me. Do you know what I mean? I always look at that and then go, is that 10%? Does that equal 500 records that we're going to press? Do you know what I mean? Like, if it isn't, then, you know, you have to do more work on building that fan base, and then that comes down to the art again. So yeah.
And it's a lot of stuff to be lugging around in the back of the estate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I still got quite a selection of my first EP that I printed very optimistically. And I don't really want people to listen to it. So
I think a lot of music. I think we're actually in an era now where there are, especially with the kind of younger ones coming through, a lot of them have never experienced that, and that's a crazy thing. Like, they've released their first thing and it's sold out on vinyl. 1,000 copies on vinyl is gone. That not everyone has gone through that, and not everyone is in that position and has that level of hype around them at the moment. So it's kind of like we're living kind of in unprecedented times, but you still have to kind of like understand your analytics, your fan base, understand who's buying. You know, everyone, if you've got social media, which you should have, just to kind of be in keeping with what's going on in the world. If you've got social media, if you've got a website, if you sell stuff on Bandcamp, wherever you sell stuff, you will have analytics. It probably, I always kind of suggest for an artist, understand your analytics, kind of really look at them and pay attention to them, and see what when you do something, see how it impacts your analytics, see what changes. Do you get more sales? You do a gig, do you get more sales? Do you, you post something online, is there more kind of engagement in your posts? All that stuff's kind of, this is the first question about knowing your audience. The analytics of all those platforms will tell you so much about what's going on, but you kind of have to spend a little time and learn it and understand it and study it and kind of see where you can kind of plot, oh, these things make a difference. Do you know what I mean? These are the things that my audience is really into that I've done. Oh, let's create some more of this content. Let's, put some more of these things on sale, whatever it may be. But I think that a lot of the time we have that. It may be small, but that's kind of all you need. Just that little bit of analytics to kind of understand how big where your fan base is spending their money, what they're doing. That stuff you can kind of start to kind of understand a little bit more. Kind of, oh, actually, this content works. I'm going to do some more of this. And I posted up this picture of a box of vinyl, and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, it's great. Let me do this." So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one last question from Lucy Woolley. How do the panel think streaming and more specifically playlisting impacts on the jazz sector and reaching new audiences?
Lucy Woolley, there's so many famous people in our audience. Glittering in front of me.
I know.
It's
mad.
I'm going to say something really brief and say the thing that I think has had the most impact has been the dissolving of genre.
Ooh, I love that word.
That has led to
the dissolving of genre. Wow.
Yeah, because it's
I think that's a really
frozen then.
Frozen again.
the pattern.
Mid. Sorry. Say that again, Meg.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems to be the pattern is that it is dissolving, and people aren't as bothered about genre anymore because they will add a playlist as opposed to adding an album to their library, perhaps. So that's a really good point.
I used to kind of said it in an interview some years ago, that I think the resurgence in the jazz thing, what we as Jazz Refreshed, one of the things I used to say all the time was genre is kind of less important now with modern technology, because at that point there was iPods and most people don't necessarily listen to one genre of music. You just put stuff on your iPod, and we were in this kind of point, like 2009 perhaps, where that kind of genre had sort of dissolved with the majority of people who listen to music. I think you have like smaller, well, I say smaller, not necessarily smaller, but more kind of niche kind of musical styles that someone may be into. And jazz is one of those ones that, like, if you're into jazz, it was almost like you couldn't be into anything else. And I used to say, it's like we're in the iPod shuffle generation where we need to just be part of that shuffle. We need to get jazz as being accepted as an accepted part of. Someone gets a jazz album, they can throw it on their iPod shuffle. They may have a hip hop tune, a pop tune, and then a jazz tune, but it's all part of that iPod shuffle generation coming through. And I think now with streaming, it's become even more like that with playlists. I think the impact is great, but at the same time, streaming services, well, the main streaming service, you could say, makes it extremely difficult for musicians and labels to even survive, because a lot of the models are based on, even when the industry went more digital, the models were based on downloads. No one's downloading now. Whereas you may get 99 pence per track, so you sell a 5-track EP for $4.99. That's streamed. You have to stream that. That has to be streamed like hundreds of thousands of times for you to get that like $4.99 or something. Do you know what I mean? So it definitely has made it more difficult. But again, it's like another one of those things that it's there. It's part of how the culture has moved to streaming. Everyone is streaming, so you have to be part of the story. You have to have the music on there. You have to use it effectively. Again, you get analytics from it. Understand the analytics. I work with artists who book tours around those analytics. You know what I mean? They're looking and seeing, oh, actually, there's some interest here. All this kind of stuff plays into it. But I think if you can get on those playlists, it's great. Yeah, again, it's another saturated market for music, so you have to work to try and get yourself seen for it.
I think as well, all the kind of curated playlist for the individual user makes a big difference. Like the kind of release radar and that kind of thing. The kind of big range of music that you get in that means that people are always kind of, I think, a bit more ready to listen to something new, because that playlist comes up for people, every week. We released a single in June, and that kind of had like a big effect on our plays, and kind of the reach of the single that we haven't really seen before, pretty much just thanks to being on one or a few playlists. But like you say, the kind of financial aspect of that isn't necessarily a particularly good model. So it's kind of yeah, it's a good and a bad thing, I think.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, so much for being in the panel. It's been amazing. It's been really interesting, actually, to hear from everyone and hear everyone's different views on the questions. And that's it for today. So thank you, Emma. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.